A wounded American soldier is saved by a Japanese widow during World War II, in a story that changed everything. Bullets fly through jungle leaves, blood seeps into mud. The soldier collapses alone, miles from his unit, with enemy patrols closing in. When he awakens, he finds himself staring into the eyes of the enemy, a Japanese woman and her two frightened children, in their simple bamboo hut. Instead of turning him in, she tends his wounds, shares their meager rice, and hides him from both Japanese soldiers and his own American comrades. But as their unlikely bond grows stronger, the world outside threatens everything. Military police arrive with deportation orders. The widow and her children must return to Japan, to the very people who executed her husband for showing mercy to Americans. The soldier must choose: walk away to save himself, or risk everything for the family that saved his life when they had every reason not to. In a war that turned neighbors into enemies, can mercy build a bridge strong enough to withstand the forces trying to tear it down? Rain poured from the dark sky as Sergeant Daniel Hayes stumbled through the thick jungle. His side burned where shrapnel had torn into his flesh. Blood mixed with the rain dripping down his uniform. The sounds of gunfire had faded, but the memory of his patrol being ambushed was still fresh in his mind. "Jenkins? Rodriguez?" Daniel called weakly, hoping to find anyone from his patrol. Only the steady drum of raindrops on leaves answered him. The jungle of Luzon seemed to swallow him whole. Tall trees blocked what little light remained in the late afternoon sky. Mud sucked at his boots with every painful step. His medical pack was lost in the attack, and his canteen had a bullet hole clean through it. Daniel touched his side and winced. The wound wasn't deep, but in this heat, infection would set in fast. He had to find help. "Just keep moving," he told himself, pushing through a tangle of vines. One foot, then the other. His vision blurred. How much blood had he lost? The trees seemed to spin around him. Daniel grabbed a branch to steady himself, but it snapped under his weight. He tumbled down a small slope and landed face first in an old irrigation ditch. The cool mud felt almost good against his burning skin. Daniel tried to push himself up, but his arms trembled and gave out. "Our Father, who art in heaven," he mumbled, trying to remember the prayer his mother had taught him. The words slipped away like water through fingers. Night fell quickly in the jungle. Crickets began their evening song as Daniel's eyes grew too heavy to keep open. In the distance, a small light flickered, a lantern in a hut perhaps, but it was too far to reach. As darkness took him, Daniel wondered if he would ever see Kansas again. Before the sun rose, Aiko Tanaka was already awake. She moved quietly in the small bamboo hut, careful not to make noise that might attract attention. Her children, Kenji, a serious boy of 10, and Hana, a curious 7-year-old girl, slept on thin mats near the fire pit. Aiko gently shook Kenji's shoulder. "Wake up, little warrior," she whispered in Japanese. "We must check the traps before others are awake." Kenji rubbed his eyes and nodded. He understood the importance of being quiet, of staying hidden. Ever since his father had been executed for refusing to harm civilians, Aiko had kept her family away from both Japanese and American soldiers. Here in the hills, they survived on what they could grow and catch. Hana stirred. "Mama, I want to help too," she said, her voice small and drowsy. "Stay here and watch the fire," Aiko told her, brushing dark hair from her daughter's forehead. "Boil some rice for breakfast. We won't be long." Outside, the air was heavy with moisture after the night's rain. Aiko carried a small knife tucked into her belt and a basket for anything they might find. Kenji walked close beside her, his eyes scanning the path ahead. The stream might be high after the rain, Aiko said. Be careful on the rocks. They made their way down the muddy trail to where Aiko had set bamboo fish traps the day before. The stream bubbled and rushed, swollen with rainwater. Look, Mama! Kenji pointed to something in the reeds. Is that a fish? Aiko squinted in the dim morning light. What she saw made her gasp. A man lay half buried in the mud and reeds. His uniform was dirty and torn, but she could still make out the American insignia. Blood had dried on his side, and his face was pale beneath streaks of mud. An American soldier, she whispered, taking a step back and pulling Kenji with her. Is he dead? Kenji asked, eyes wide with fear. Aiko watched carefully. The soldier's chest rose and fell weakly. No, still alive. She bit her lip, thinking hard. If Japanese soldiers found an American in their territory, they would kill him. If they learned Aiko had seen him and not reported it, they might kill her family too. The safest thing would be to leave him, to pretend they never saw him. But her husband's voice seemed to whisper in her ear. Takeo had always believed in showing kindness, even in war. It was why he had refused orders and paid with his life. The gods put him in our path, Aiko murmured. We cannot turn away. But Mama, he's the enemy, Kenji said, repeating what he'd heard so many times. Aiko knelt beside her son and took his small hands in hers. Your father taught us that mercy knows no uniform. This man is someone's son, just as you are mine. Kenji looked at the soldier, then back at his mother. Slowly, he nodded. We'll need help carrying him, Aiko said. Let's check the traps quickly, then come back. They found one small fish in the traps, barely enough for the morning meal. Aiko added it to her basket before returning to the hut. Hana looked up as they entered. A small pot of rice boiled over the fire. We found only one fish, Aiko said, setting down her basket. But we found something else too. Kenji, stay with your sister. I need to fetch something. What did you find, Mama? Hana asked. Aiko paused at the door. Someone who needs our help. With Kenji's help, Aiko managed to drag the unconscious soldier back to their hut. They laid him on a woven mat near the fire. The warmth seemed to bring some color back to his face. Who is he? Hana whispered, hiding behind her mother's skirt. An American soldier, Aiko replied, dipping a cloth in clean water. He's hurt. As Aiko gently cleaned mud from the man's face, she noticed how young he seemed, maybe 25, not much older than she was. His wound wasn't deep, but angry red lines spread from it, the beginning of infection. Kenji, fetch the herbs I dried last week, she said. The ones with the small purple flowers. While Kenji rummaged through their few possessions, Aiko carefully cut away the soldier's shirt around the wound. She cleaned it as best she could, then crushed the herbs Kenji brought and made a poultice. Will he live, Mama? Hana asked, creeping closer to look at the stranger. If the spirits are kind, Aiko replied, placing the poultice on the wound. Now we must wait. Daniel floated in darkness for what felt like days. Sometimes he heard voices speaking in a language he didn't understand. Sometimes he felt cool hands on his forehead or a bitter taste in his mouth. Mostly, he dreamed of home, of wheat fields waving in the Kansas wind, of his mother's kitchen, of a world without war. When he finally opened his eyes, sunlight filtered through bamboo walls. For a moment, Daniel couldn't remember where he was or how he'd gotten there. Then the pain in his side reminded him of the ambush, of stumbling through the jungle. But this wasn't the jungle. This was some kind of hut, and leaning over him was... Daniel gasped and tried to sit up. A Japanese woman, and behind her, 2 children with wide, frightened eyes. "Enemy," he croaked, his throat dry as dust. His hand fumbled for a weapon that wasn't there. The woman shook her head and offered a cup of water. "No enemy," she said in broken English. "Rest." Daniel looked from her face to the cup and back again. Was this a trick? Was he a prisoner? The woman seemed to understand his fear. She took a small sip from the cup herself, then offered it to him again. "Water. Good." Thirst won out over suspicion. Daniel took the cup with shaking hands and drank deeply. The cool water was the sweetest thing he'd ever tasted. "Where am I?" he asked, looking around the small hut. It was sparsely furnished, just some mats, cooking utensils, and a few personal items. The woman pointed to herself. "Aiko." Then to the children. "Kenji, Hana." "Daniel," he said, touching his chest. "Sergeant Daniel Hayes." Aiko nodded and smiled slightly. "Daniel-san, you hurt. We help." As his mind cleared, Daniel began to understand. This wasn't a prison. These people had found him and cared for him. But why? Would a Japanese family help an American soldier? The boy, Kenji, watched him with suspicious eyes, but the little girl, Hana, crept closer, curious despite her fear. "Thank you," Daniel said, the words feeling inadequate. "Thank you for helping me." Aiko bowed slightly. "No enemies here," she replied. "Only people." Days passed as Daniel regained his strength. His fever broke, and the infection in his side began to heal. Aiko changed his bandages twice daily, applying fresh herb poultices each time. The family shared what little food they had, mostly rice, fish, and vegetables from their small garden. Daniel learned that Aiko and her children lived in constant fear. Japanese patrols sometimes came through the area, looking for deserters or resistance fighters. American troops weren't much better, treating all Japanese with suspicion and hostility. One evening, as rain drummed on the roof, Daniel watched Aiko burn some papers in the fire pit. Japanese writing curled and blackened in the flames. "What are those?" he asked, his voice stronger now. Aiko glanced up, sadness in her eyes. "Papers, from before." With simple words and gestures, she told him her story. Her husband, Takeo, had been an officer in the Japanese army, but he had refused orders to harm Filipino civilians and was executed for his disobedience. Aiko and her children had fled to this remote area, afraid of both sides in the war. Daniel thought of his own family back home, his mother tending her garden, his father working the farm. How would they feel if the war came to their doorstep? "I'm sorry," he said, reaching out to touch Aiko's hand. "War makes monsters of good men." She seemed to understand. Takeo say, "Choose mercy, always." A fragile trust began to grow between them. Daniel helped around the hut as his strength returned, fixing the leaky roof, gathering firewood, showing Kenji how to set better traps for fish. Then came the day that changed everything. Daniel was teaching Hana English words when they heard boots outside. Aiko's face went pale. She motioned for silence and quickly pushed Daniel under the floor mats into a small storage space beneath the hut. From his hiding place, Daniel could see through cracks between the bamboo slats. American soldiers entered the hut, led by Corporal Mason, a man known for his hatred of the Japanese. "Search the place," Mason ordered. "These Japs are probably hiding fugitives." Aiko stood with her hands folded, her face blank. She bowed slightly. "No hiding. Just children." Mason looked around the hut with disgust. "You speak pretty good English for a peasant. Where'd you learn that, huh? In a POW camp, teaching Jap soldiers how to interrogate our boys?" Kenji moved protectively in front of his sister. The boy was trembling, but his eyes were defiant. Mason noticed. "What's this? the little man of the house. He reached out and grabbed Kenji's arm. You hiding something, boy? When Kenji didn't answer, Mason slapped him hard, across the face. The boy stumbled, but didn't cry out. Daniel's blood boiled. His fingers found the knife Aiko used for cooking, hidden among the stored vegetables. It would be so easy to thrust it up through the floor to stop Mason's cruelty. But that would doom them all. Aiko stepped forward. Please, no Japanese here, only us. Mason snorted and pushed her aside. Check everything, he told the other soldiers. Tear it apart if you have to. They overturned the cooking pot, spilling the family's dinner onto the dirt floor. They scattered the few possessions, broke jars of preserved food, and poked bayonets into the thatched roof. All the while, Daniel lay still as stone, barely breathing. If they found him here, in a Japanese home? After what seemed like hours, Mason gave up. Nothing worth taking anyway. He spat. Let's move on. As the soldiers left, Mason turned back. We'll be watching you, woman. One hint that you're helping the enemy, and you'll join your husband. Only when the sound of boots faded did Aiko help Daniel out from his hiding place. Her hands were shaking. Daniel emerged, fury burning in his chest. I should have stopped him, he growled. No man treats a child that way. Aiko shook her head. Then we all die. She gently touched the red mark on Kenji's cheek. The boy leaned into his mother's hand, tears finally coming now that the danger had passed. Daniel knelt in front of Kenji. You were brave, he said, like a true soldier. The boy looked up, a hint of pride breaking through his tears. Daniel turned to Aiko. You saved my life, he said solemnly. I'll save yours, I promise. That night, as the family slept, Daniel kept watch by the door. The promise he'd made wasn't just words. These people had risked everything to help him, an enemy. The least he could do was protect them in return. As rain pattered on the roof, Daniel thought about what he'd seen today. Cruelty from his own countrymen, kindness from those he'd been taught to hate. The world had turned upside down, but in this small hut, he'd found something true. A bridge of mercy, spanning the divide of war. Morning sunlight streamed through the bamboo walls of the hut. Daniel woke early, his side aching but healing. He watched as Aiko quietly prepared rice for breakfast, her movements graceful despite her tiredness. Let me help, Daniel said, pushing himself up from his sleeping mat. Aiko shook her head. You rest, still healing. But Daniel was already on his feet. My ma always said idle hands make the devil's work. I reckon I've been idle long enough. Outside, he noticed the roof leaked badly in several places. During the night's rain, Aiko had placed buckets and bowls to catch the water. The sight of those makeshift solutions stirred something in Daniel. I can fix that roof, he said, pointing upward. To thank you. Kenji had come outside and stood watching, his arms crossed. The boy still didn't fully trust the American soldier, but curiosity won out over suspicion. You know how? Kenji asked in broken English. Daniel smiled. Back home in Kansas, I helped my pa fix everything on our farm. A roof ain't so different, whether it's in America or the Philippines. With Kenji's help, Daniel gathered bamboo strips and palm fronds. His wound made climbing difficult, but he managed to reach the roof. Kenji handed up materials from below. Hana came out to watch, giggling as Daniel fumbled with the unfamiliar materials. Even Aiko smiled at his determination. By midday, the roof was patched. When afternoon rains came, not a single drop fell inside the hut. Daniel felt a warm pride seeing Aiko's grateful nod. That evening, They sat together drinking tea made from local herbs. Hannah shyly offered Daniel a small wooden flute, showing him how to play simple notes. Kenji taught him Japanese words, laughing when Daniel's tongue tripped over the sounds. In return, Daniel taught them English and told stories of his Kansas home. "Snow?" Hannah asked, eyes wide with wonder. "Cold white rain?" "Not rain exactly," Daniel explained, smiling at her curiosity. "It falls soft and quiet, like feathers from the sky. In winter, the whole world turns white and peaceful." "Someday, I see snow," Hannah declared, her English improving daily. These small moments, sharing tea, learning words, telling stories, began to heal wounds deeper than the one in Daniel's side. For the first time since shipping out, he felt like a person again, not just a soldier. But happiness never lasts long in wartime. One morning, Daniel was helping Aiko in her small garden when he spotted Corporal Mason talking with another soldier. Mason pointed toward the hills, toward their hut. "Trouble's coming," Daniel said quietly. Aiko straightened up from her work, soil clinging to her fingers. "Always trouble in war," she replied, her voice resigned. Sure enough, the next day, a military wagon arrived. A stern-faced lieutenant stepped down, holding official papers. "By order of the United States Army," he announced, "this land is being seized for construction of a supply depot. All residents must vacate within 7 days." Aiko received the news with the same quiet dignity she showed in all hardships. She bowed slightly and accepted the papers, though she couldn't read them. But Daniel burned with anger. "This is private land," he argued, stepping forward. "You can't just take it." The lieutenant looked surprised to see an American soldier there. "Sergeant Hayes, what the hell are you doing here?" "Recovering from injuries," Daniel said stiffly. "These people saved my life." Mason, who had accompanied the lieutenant, snorted. "Fraternizing with the enemy, more like. You gone native, Hayes?" Daniel's hands curled into fists, but Aiko touched his arm gently. "No trouble?" she whispered. "Not worth it." But Daniel couldn't let it go. After the soldiers left, he paced the small hut. "This ain't right. This land's all you have." "Many things not right in war," Aiko said as she quietly began gathering their few possessions. "We find new place." That night, watching Kenji and Hannah sleeping peacefully by the hearth, Daniel made a decision. Even if he had to face his own men, he would fight for this family who had shown him kindness when they had every reason not to. The next morning, Daniel caught a ride on a supply truck headed to the command post. The journey was slow over roads turned to mud by constant rain. He rehearsed what he would say to the commanding officer, knowing his words needed to be perfect. At the command post, Daniel waited hours to see Major Richards. When finally admitted to the officer's tent, he stood at attention despite the pain in his side. "Sergeant Hayes," the major said without looking up from his papers, "I hear you've been living with the enemy." "Sir, they're not the enemy," Daniel replied. "They're civilians, a widow and 2 children. The woman's husband was executed by the Japanese for refusing to harm Filipino civilians." Richards finally looked up, his face stern. "You're here to follow orders, Sergeant, not redeem the enemy. This war has cost too many American lives for sentimentality." "Sir, with respect, their hut is outside military jurisdiction. It's on a hillside not suitable for any depot." "That's not your concern." The major's voice hardened. "I suggest you remember which uniform you're wearing, Sergeant. Compassion for the Japanese isn't a luxury we can afford." Daniel swallowed hard. What if they had somewhere else to go? Would the eviction order still stand? Richard sighed. "Look, Hayes, I don't make these decisions. Higher command wants a depot there, and that's that. Your Friends, need to be gone in 7 days. Daniel saluted stiffly and left, his heart heavy. By the time he walked back to the hut, dusk had fallen and his boots were caked with mud. In the distance, he saw lanterns glowing through bamboo walls, Aiko and the children waiting, hoping for good news. He couldn't bring himself to crush that hope. Not yet. Might take more time, he said when Aiko asked about his meeting. But I'll think of something. That night, rain pounded the roof he had fixed with his own hands. Daniel lay awake, listening to the steady drumming and the soft breathing of the family who had saved him. He wouldn't let them lose their home. He couldn't. For days, rain fell without stopping. The stream rose, threatening to flood the lower fields. Food supplies dwindled, and Aiko's face grew worried as she stretched their meals thinner each day. Daniel knew they needed help. Despite the downpour, he hiked to a nearby mission school he'd heard about from passing soldiers. There, he met Sister Mary Catherine, an American nurse who ran a small orphanage for children displaced by the war. The mission was simple but clean, with a small chapel, a schoolhouse, and dormitories for the children. Sister Mary greeted him with kind eyes in a weathered face. "What brings a soldier to our door in such weather?" she asked, offering him a towel to dry off. Daniel hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I'm looking for food, ma'am, for a family that helped me when I was wounded." Sister Mary studied his face. "A local family?" "Japanese," Daniel admitted. "A widow and her 2 children." Instead of the judgment he expected, Sister Mary nodded thoughtfully. "The enemy is rarely the one who offers you bread and shelter," she said. "Come, let's get you some supplies." As they gathered rice, dried fish, and medicine, Daniel told her more of his story: the ambush, Aiko finding him, the eviction order. Sister Mary listened without interrupting. When he finished, she handed him a worn Bible. "Sometimes, mercy is the only rebellion worth making," she said softly. Then, more practically, "The family could stay here at the mission. We have room, and the military rarely bothers us." Daniel felt hope rise in his chest for the first time in days. "You'd do that for strangers? For Japanese?" Sister Mary's smile was gentle but firm. "In God's eyes, there are no strangers, only children who have forgotten their family." Daniel returned to the hut with bread, medicine, and hope. "There's a place we can go," he told Aiko. "A mission school run by an American nun. She's offered shelter until this eviction business is sorted out." Aiko looked uncertain. "Americans welcome Japanese?" "This American will," Daniel assured her. "She understands that kindness doesn't wear a uniform." The next morning dawned bright and clear after days of rain. Sunlight sparkled on wet leaves as Daniel helped the family load their few belongings onto an old handcart. Kenji carried a small bag containing his father's prayer beads and a photograph wrapped in oilcloth. Hana held tightly to a cloth doll Aiko had made for her. As they walked the muddy trail toward the mission, Daniel felt strange wearing his uniform again. Part of him belonged to the army, to America, to the war effort. But another part now belonged to this small family who had shown him that humanity could survive even in the darkest times. Sister Mary greeted them at the mission gate, her smile warm and welcoming. Some of the other staff and children watched from windows, their faces curious or wary. "Welcome," Sister Mary said, bowing slightly to Aiko. "Any friend of Sergeant Hayes is a friend of ours." Aiko returned the bow, deeper and longer. "Thank you for your kindness." The family settled into a small room near the garden. Kenji joined local boys in lessons, surprising everyone with how quickly he picked up English. Hana helped in the garden, singing softly as she worked. Daniel volunteered to repair broken furniture and teach English to the older children. That evening, as church bells rang for prayers, Daniel found Aiko sitting alone under a mango tree. "Are you all right?" he asked, sitting beside her. She nodded, her eyes on the horizon where their hut stood empty. "Different here, but safe." She turned to look at him. "Why you help us? We should be enemy." Daniel thought for a long moment before answering. "My pa used to say that a man's character is measured by how he treats folks who can't do anything for him. You helped me when you had every reason not to. Reckon I'm just returning the favor." "Not favor," Aiko said softly. "Friendship." The word settled between them, simple yet profound. Life at the mission settled into a routine. Daniel's wound healed completely, though it left a jagged scar. He should have reported back to his unit, but each day he found another reason to stay. A fence needed fixing, English lessons weren't finished, Kenji wanted to learn baseball. But rumors spread. Soldiers who came to the mission for supplies whispered that Sergeant Hayes had gone native. Mason made sure everyone heard stories of Daniel living with Japs. Daniel ignored the talk, focusing instead on the small family that had become so important to him. But Aiko felt the sting of those whispers. One night, she confessed to Sister Mary that she was thinking of leaving to protect Daniel's reputation. "Love shown in hardship is God's language," Sister Mary counseled her. "It speaks louder than any rumor." Before Aiko could decide, crisis struck. Hana began coughing one evening, deep, racking coughs that shook her small frame. By midnight, fever burned through her body. Daniel carried the child to the mission infirmary at dawn. Sister Mary examined her with growing concern. "Pneumonia, I think," she said gravely. "We need medicine, stronger than what we have here." Daniel knew the army doctor had such medicine. He ran to the field hospital, his heart pounding with fear for the little girl who had become like family to him. But the army doctor, a hard man named Jenkins, refused to help when he learned who the patient was. "I don't treat enemy children," he said coldly. "We barely have enough supplies for our own men." Daniel pleaded, offered to pay, even threatened. Nothing moved the doctor. Desperation drove Daniel to the field dispensary that night. Using his sergeant's authority, he forged requisition papers for quinine and antibiotics. The young corporal on duty handed over the medicine without question. Daniel was halfway back to the mission when a hand grabbed his shoulder. Mason stood there, a cruel smile on his face. "Stealing army supplies, Sergeant?" Mason said, looking at the medicine in Daniel's hand. "For your little Jap family?" "There's a sick child," Daniel said evenly. "Would you let her die because of where she was born?" "I'd follow orders," Mason replied. "Something you seem to have forgotten." Military police came quickly. Daniel was arrested, the medicine confiscated. As they led him away in handcuffs, rain began to fall again, cold and relentless. In the guard tent, Daniel sat on the muddy ground, his wrists raw from the cuffs. Rain leaked through the canvas above him. All he could think about was Hana, burning with fever, waiting for medicine that might never come. He bowed his head and prayed, really prayed, for the first time since the ambush. "If I must fall for mercy, let it be worth it," he whispered. "Let her live." Dawn broke with the news that Sister Mary had somehow obtained medicine. Hana's fever had broken during the night. When a guard told Daniel, he closed his eyes in silent thanks. Mason came by later, unable to resist taunting him. "Your Japanese family won't save you from court-martial," he sneered through the fence. Daniel didn't respond. Nothing Mason could say would make him regret trying to save Hana. 2 days later, word spread through camp. The war was officially over. Japan had surrendered. In the chaos of demobilization, minor infractions were being overlooked. Daniel was released, but demoted for his actions. He didn't care about the demotion. As soon as he was free, he ran all the way to the mission. There, he found Kenji and Hana playing in the courtyard. When they saw him, they shouted with joy and ran toward him. "Daniel-san!" Hana called, her voice still weak but her smile bright. "You come back!" He knelt and caught them both in a hug, his heart too full for words. Aiko stood in the doorway, tears shining in her eyes. She bowed deeply when Daniel approached. "The war is over," he told her. "We can rebuild now." Together, they returned to where the hut had stood. The army had abandoned the depot plans when the war ended. With help from Sister Mary and some of the mission children, they began rebuilding. The work was hard, but healing. Each bamboo pole set, each palm frond laid, a step toward the future. Under the first clear night sky in months, they shared a simple meal of rice and fish by lantern light. The war had ended, and for a brief moment, peace felt possible. Weeks passed. The harvest season began, bringing the promise of plenty after months of scarcity. Daniel and Kenji planted new rice shoots in flooded paddies, mud squishing between their toes. Hana, fully recovered, chased dragonflies along the edge of the fields. Villagers who had once avoided Aiko began to help again. They remembered how she had hidden Filipino children during the Japanese occupation, risking her life for others. Slowly, respect returned. Daniel wrote to his mother in Kansas, telling her he'd found reason again in this small corner of the Philippines. He didn't know how to explain that he couldn't leave, not yet, maybe not ever. One evening, as they packed harvested rice into woven baskets, Mason rode past on patrol. He said nothing, but his glare spoke volumes. Daniel watched him go, a chill running down his spine despite the warm evening. "He's still angry," Aiko observed quietly. "Some men hold on to hate because it's easier than changing," Daniel replied. "Don't worry about Mason." But his words were braver than his thoughts. Mason wasn't the type to forget a grudge, and with the war ended, soldiers had more time for personal vendettas. Daniel's fears proved well-founded. A week later, a government jeep bounced up the rutted path to their rebuilt home. An official in a crisp uniform handed Aiko a document. "What does it say?" she asked Daniel, her hands trembling. Daniel read it, his face growing pale. "It's a deportation order," he said, his voice tight with anger. "All Japanese nationals are to be repatriated to Japan. Your name is on the list." Aiko stared at the paper as if it might turn into a snake. "Japan, but nothing there for us now. No family, no home." "When?" Kenji asked, old enough to understand what this meant. 2 weeks, Daniel said, his mind already racing for solutions. That night, Daniel sat outside with Aiko, watching fireflies drift like earthbound stars. The children slept inside, unaware that their world was about to change again. "Maybe this mercy was only for a season," Aiko said softly, her voice resigned. Daniel took her hand, his grip firm and determined. "Not if I can help it," he promised. "This ain't over yet." As night deepened around them, Daniel knew that the hardest battle still lay ahead. Not against an enemy army, but against the machinery of government that saw Aiko and her children as just names on a list, not as people who had built a home from the ashes of war. But this was a battle worth fighting. For mercy, for family, for love that had grown in the most unlikely soil. And Daniel Hayes never backed down from a fight that mattered. Dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold as Daniel marched toward the army camp. His jaw was set, his mind made up. He had to find information, anything that might stop Aiko's deportation. The camp was buzzing with activity. Soldiers packed crates and loaded trucks. With the war over, most troops were eager to go home. But Daniel couldn't leave, not with Iko and the children facing deportation to a country that held nothing for them but painful memories. He spotted Corporal Mason smoking by the supply tent and swallowed his pride. Mason might be a bully, but he had connections in headquarters. "Mason," Daniel called, keeping his voice even. "Got a minute?" Mason turned, surprise crossing his face before his usual sneer returned. "Well, if it ain't the Jap lover. What do you want, Hayes?" Daniel ignored the insult. "Information about the deportation ships. When are they sailing?" Mason studied Daniel's face, then laughed without humor. "Why? Planning to stow away with your little family?" "Just tell me," Daniel said, his patience wearing thin. 2 weeks from Tuesday. Shipping out from Manila Harbor." Mason flicked his cigarette away. "Nothing you can do about it, Hayes. Orders come straight from the governor's office." Daniel nodded stiffly. "Much obliged for the information." Mason's laughter followed him as he walked away. "You threw away your career for them? Was it worth it?" Daniel didn't answer, but in his heart, he knew it was. The love he'd found with Iko and her children was worth any sacrifice. Back at their hut, Daniel paced the small room, thinking hard. "There's got to be a way," he muttered. "Some legal angle we ain't tried." Kenji sat cross-legged on a mat, watching Daniel with solemn eyes. "Maybe it's fate," the boy said quietly. "My father used to say sometimes we must accept what comes." "Your father also chose to stand up for what's right," Daniel replied gently. "That's what I aim to do." Later that morning, Daniel walked to the mission to seek Sister Mary's counsel. He found her in the garden, hands deep in soil as she planted seedlings with some of the orphaned children. "Sister," he said, removing his hat, "I need help." Sister Mary straightened up, wiping dirt from her hands. She saw his troubled expression and nodded. "Come to the chapel. We'll talk." In the cool shade of the simple bamboo chapel, Daniel explained about the deportation order. "I can't let them take Iko and the children back to Japan. There's nothing for them there, but I don't know how to stop it." "Violence isn't the answer," Sister Mary said firmly, seeing the desperate look in his eyes. "I know that," Daniel sighed. "But what else is there?" Sister Mary was quiet for a moment, her weathered face thoughtful. "There was an archive," she said slowly. "Old intelligence reports and documents captured from the Japanese last year. The mission stored them for the army in our cellar. Most were taken away, but some might still be there." Hope flickered in Daniel's chest. "What kind of documents?" "Records of military personnel, including those executed for insubordination. If Aiko's husband truly died for refusing orders, there might be a record. And that might prove Aiko was the wife of someone who helped our side," Daniel said, understanding blooming. "Not an enemy to be sent away." Sister Mary nodded. "It's worth looking. But Daniel," she added, laying a hand on his arm, "pray for God's guidance. Seek His way, not man's." That night, after the mission had grown quiet, Daniel and Sister Mary descended into the cellar with lanterns. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old paper. Stacks of crates lined the walls, filled with documents in Japanese. "I can't read any of this," Daniel admitted, holding up a paper covered in Japanese characters. "We'll need Aiko's help," Sister Mary said. "But we can at least sort through what's here." Hour after hour, they searched through the papers by lantern light. Their eyes grew tired, their backs ached, but they continued. Dawn was breaking when Daniel lifted the lid on a small wooden box tucked beneath a shelf. "Sister," he called, voice tight with excitement. "Look at this." Inside were files with official seals. On one folder, a name stood out. Tanaka. Tanaka, Daniel repeated. That's Aiko's family name. With trembling hands, he opened the folder. Though he couldn't read the contents, he recognized a photograph paperclipped to one page. A Japanese officer in uniform. Takeo, he whispered. This must be him. Sister Mary leaned closer, studying the documents. We need Aiko to translate. But Daniel, this could be what we've been praying for. They emerged from the cellar as the rooster crowed, tired but hopeful. Daniel clutched the folder to his chest, whispering, We may have just found her salvation. Aiko's hands shook as she read the documents. Tears streamed down her face. What does it say? Daniel asked gently. Aiko wiped her eyes. It tells of my husband, how he helped American prisoners escape. Her voice broke. He died for this. They killed him because he chose mercy over orders. Daniel's heart swelled with pride for a man he'd never met. Takeo was a hero, he said, and this proves it. Sister Mary examined the papers. This document could show that Aiko was the wife of a man who aided the Allied forces, not an enemy to be deported. But will they listen? Aiko asked, doubt in her voice. They'll listen, Daniel said with determination. I'll make sure of it. The original document was too fragile to move, so Daniel and Aiko spent hours copying it by hand. She translated while he wrote, carefully preserving every detail. Sister Mary helped where she could, offering prayers and encouragement. When they finished, Daniel studied the papers. We need to take this to Manila, he said, to the governor's office. They're the ones who can stop the deportation. Manila? Aiko looked alarmed. It's very far. 3 days by wagon to the rail station, then another day by train, Sister Mary confirmed. And the deportation is in less than 2 weeks. Daniel squared his shoulders. Then we'd best get started. Leaving Kenji and Hana in Sister Mary's care wasn't easy. The children clung to their mother, afraid they might never see her again. I come back, Aiko promised, hugging them close. Daniel-san and I will fix this. You take care of your sister, Daniel told Kenji, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. You're the man of the house while we're gone. Kenji stood straighter, accepting the responsibility. Yes, Daniel-san. Sister Mary arranged for an old wagon and a gentle horse. She packed food for the journey and a tin box to keep the precious document dry. God go with you both, she said as they prepared to leave. I'll pray every hour until you return. The journey began at dawn. Daniel drove the wagon while Aiko sat beside him, clutching the tin box to her chest. The road was little more than a muddy track through hills and valleys. Progress was slow, the wheels often getting stuck in deep ruts. Rain started falling in the afternoon, a gentle drizzle that soon turned into a downpour. Daniel covered Aiko with his army jacket, but they were both soaked through within minutes. I'm sorry, he said, feeling helpless against the elements. Aiko shook her head. Rain is blessing, she replied. It washes away old troubles, makes new growth possible. Her quiet strength humbled him. Here was a woman who had lost her husband, her home, and might soon lose her country too. Yet still she found hope in rain. By nightfall, they had traveled only half the distance to the rail station. They found shelter in an abandoned shed, its roof mostly intact. Daniel built a small fire while Aiko spread their blankets to dry. Will they believe us? She asked quietly as they sat watching the flames. One paper against big government? Daniel wished he could promise that everything would work out. But he'd seen enough of war and bureaucracy to know better than to make promises he couldn't keep. Truth has power, he said instead. Your husband was a good man who died doing the right thing. That's gotta count for something in this crazy world. Aiko nodded and pulled out a small cloth pouch from inside her dress. From it, she took a worn photograph. Takeo in civilian clothes, smiling, with his arms around a younger Aiko and baby Kenji. For strength, she explained, touching the image gently. To remember why we fight. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. We'll win this fight, he said, his voice rough with emotion. For Takeo, for the kids, for us. The next day brought more challenges. A bridge had washed out, forcing them to find a place to ford the swollen river. The wagon nearly tipped over in the rushing water. Daniel had to carry Aiko across the deepest part, the tin box held high above the current. By afternoon, their food was gone, and still the rail station seemed far away. They stopped at a small village where a kind Filipino family offered them rice and shelter for the night. The American and the Japanese, traveling together. The old grandfather marveled as they ate. Perhaps this is how peace begins, one friendship at a time. That night, they slept on the porch of a small church, the stars peeking through breaks in the clouds. Daniel found himself praying again, something he hadn't done regularly since childhood. Lord, he whispered, I ain't been the best Christian, but these people need a miracle, and I reckon you're in that business. On the third day, they finally reached the rail station. The train to Manila would leave at noon. They arrived with minutes to spare, boarding the crowded car with relief. The journey by rail was faster, but no less tiring. They sat on hard wooden benches, surrounded by farmers, merchants, and soldiers heading to the capital. Many stared at the unusual pair, an American sergeant and a Japanese woman traveling alone together. Daniel ignored the looks, focusing instead on what they would say to the officials in Manila. Aiko slept against his shoulder, exhausted from the journey. As the sun began to set, smoke from Manila's harbor became visible in the distance. Daniel gently woke Aiko. We're almost there, he said. The ship sails at dawn tomorrow. Aiko's eyes widened with worry. So little time? It's enough, Daniel assured her, though his own heart raced with anxiety. It has to be. They spent that night in a small boarding house near the harbor. Neither slept much. Tomorrow would decide everything. The administrative building stood imposing in the morning light, its colonial architecture a reminder of powers that had come and gone while the Filipino people endured. Daniel straightened his uniform, making sure his sergeant's stripes were visible. Beside him, Aiko wore her cleanest dress, her hair neatly combed. Ready? He asked. She nodded once, her face composed despite the fear he knew she felt. Inside, clerks and officers hurried through marble hallways. Daniel approached a desk where a young lieutenant sat shuffling papers. We need to see Colonel Whitmore, Daniel said. The district governor. The lieutenant didn't even look up. The colonel doesn't see people without appointments. It's about the deportation orders, Daniel pressed. We have new information. Important information. File a petition with the records office, the lieutenant said dismissively. Third floor, room 302. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low but intense. Listen, Lieutenant. There's a ship leaving this morning with Japanese civilians on board. One of them is the widow of a man who helped American POWs escape. He was executed for it. Now our government wants to send his family back to the people who killed him. That got the lieutenant's attention. He looked up, studying Daniel's face. Wait here, he said finally. They waited nearly an hour before being escorted to Colonel Whitmore's office. The colonel was a tall man with a gray mustache and tired eyes. He looked up from his desk with barely concealed impatience. You have 5 minutes, Sergeant, he said. This had better be important. Daniel placed the copied document on the desk. Sir, this is a translation of a Japanese intelligence report found at the mission in Luzon. It confirms that Takeo Tanaka, an officer in the Japanese army, was executed for helping American prisoners escape. Colonel Whitmore glanced at the papers without touching them. And this concerns me how? His widow, Aiko Tanaka, is scheduled for deportation this morning, Daniel continued, gesturing to Aiko. Sir, sending her back to Japan would be sending her to the same people who killed her husband for helping us. The colonel leaned back in his chair. Do you have the original document? It's at the mission, sir. Too fragile to transport, but Sister Mary Catherine can confirm its authenticity. A missionary's word and a handwritten copy. Colonel Whitmore shook his head. Not exactly compelling evidence, Sergeant. Sir, Daniel said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. This woman saved my life when I was wounded behind enemy lines. She risked everything, her safety, her children's safety, to help an American soldier. Her husband died, showing the same courage. Doesn't that count for something? The colonel studied Daniel, then Aiko. Mrs. Tanaka, why did you help Sergeant Hayes when you found him? Many of your countrymen would have turned him in or killed him outright. Aiko stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly together. My husband teach us. Mercy is strength, not weakness, she said in careful English. Enemy is just person far from home, same as us. Something in her simple dignity seemed to reach the colonel. He was quiet for a long moment. I can't make decisions based on sentiment, he said finally. But I can delay the deportation long enough to verify your story. My clerk will telegraph the mission for confirmation. Hope bloomed in Daniel's chest. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, Sergeant. If your story checks out, I'll consider removing Mrs. Tanaka from the deportation list. If not... He left the sentence unfinished. They spent the rest of the day waiting in a small anteroom. Hours crept by. Through the window, Daniel could see the deportation ship in the harbor, smoke already rising from its stacks. They were running out of time. Evening shadows lengthened across the floor. Daniel paced while Aiko sat perfectly still, her eyes closed in what might have been prayer. Finally, as dusk fell, a clerk burst into the room. Colonel Whitmore wants to see you, he said breathlessly. Now. The colonel stood by the window when they entered, hands clasped behind his back. He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. A telegram arrived from Luzon, he said. Sister Mary Catherine confirmed the document's existence. Further, our intelligence office reports that a Takeo Tanaka was indeed listed among Japanese officers executed for treason last year. Daniel held his breath, waiting. The deportation order for Aiko Tanaka and her children is hereby revoked, Colonel Whitmore announced. Mrs. Tanaka, you are free to remain in the Philippines as the widow of a man who, though an enemy soldier, displayed humanity in a time of brutality. Aiko's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down her face as she bowed deeply to the colonel. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for my children's future. Colonel Whitmore nodded once, uncomfortable with her emotion. The clerk will provide the official paperwork. Good day to you both. Outside, in the warm evening air, Daniel and Aiko stood in stunned silence. It had worked. Against all odds, they had won. We go home now? Aiko asked, clutching the pardon to her chest. Daniel nodded, a smile breaking across his face like sunrise. We go home. The journey back took less time, their hearts lighter despite their tired bodies. They traveled by train again, then hired a farm truck for the final stretch to their village. Rain fell steadily, turning the roads to rivers of mud. They reached the village after nightfall. Lanterns glowed through the darkness, and Daniel could make out figures waiting by Aiko's rebuilt hut. Sister Mary and the children, already packed for deportation, soldiers waiting to escort them. Daniel jumped from the truck before it fully stopped. "We have it," he called, waving the official pardon. "The order is revoked." The soldiers examined the document by lantern light, faces skeptical until they recognized Colonel Whitmore's signature. They saluted stiffly and left without a word. Kenji and Hana broke free from Sister Mary's side, running through the rain to their mother. Aiko fell to her knees in the mud, gathering both children into her arms, sobbing with relief. Daniel stood back, his own eyes burning with tears. Sister Mary approached, her face shining with joy despite the downpour. "The bells rang just before you arrived," she said. "I knew it was a sign." Daniel looked at Aiko and the children, still clinging to each other as if they might never let go. "Never thought I'd be so happy to stand in the rain," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It's more than rain," Sister Mary replied softly. "It's grace returned." In the weeks that followed, life took on new sweetness. Daniel and Aiko rebuilt their home with timber salvaged from the abandoned depot project. The hut grew larger, with separate rooms for the children and a real wooden floor raised above the floodline. Villagers who had once been wary of the Japanese family now brought seeds, tools, and helping hands. Word of their story had spread. How an American sergeant had fought the system to save a Japanese widow who had once saved him. "Mercy always returns," Sister Mary said when she visited, watching Hana plant flowers along the garden path. "Sometimes through the most unexpected hands." Kenji, growing tall and confident, began teaching younger village children English with Daniel's help. The boy had his father's quiet dignity and his mother's gentle strength. Daniel helped Aiko in the fields each day, learning to plant rice and tend vegetables. In the evenings, they sat together on the porch of their expanded home, watching fireflies dance above the patties. "What happens now?" Aiko asked one night as crickets chirped in the darkness. "You go back to America soon?" The question had weighed on Daniel's mind. His discharge papers had come through. Officially, he could return to Kansas anytime. But the thought of leaving this place, leaving this family, felt like tearing out his own heart. "I reckon Kansas will still be there when I'm ready to visit," he said slowly. "But my home is here now, with you, with the kids, if you'll have me." Aiko's eyes shimmered in the lamplight. "You stay? Truly?" "I can't imagine being anywhere else," Daniel admitted. "This is where I found myself again, where I learned that love is stronger than war." One evening, Sister Mary arrived with a special gift, a worn family Bible translated in both English and Japanese. "So both your children can pray in any tongue," she said, placing it in Aiko's hands. Aiko traced the cover reverently. "Thank you for helping save us," she said, "for believing when others did not." Sister Mary smiled. "God has a way of building bridges where walls once stood." Spring arrived, painting the hills with wildflowers. The church, rebuilt from rubble, prepared for its first peacetime service. Daniel stood nervously in a clean shirt borrowed from one of the mission teachers. Beside him, Sister Mary adjusted his collar. "Still time to change your mind," she teased gently. Daniel shook his head. "Not a chance." The small church filled with villagers, mission staff, and a few American soldiers from the nearby camp. Even Corporal Mason came, standing awkwardly at the back, his hostility softened by time and the undeniable power of the story he had witnessed. Kenji walked down the aisle first, carrying his father's prayer beads on a small cushion. The boy no longer looked like a child. Responsibility and love had matured him beyond his years. Then Aiko appeared in the doorway, wearing a simple white dress Sister Mary had helped her make. Her dark hair was adorned with small white flowers, and her face glowed with quiet joy. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. She looked like hope itself, walking toward him. They exchanged simple vows, their hands trembling slightly as they held each other's. No lavish ceremony, just quiet faith and the promise of tomorrow. Kenji read a verse from Psalms about mercy triumphing over judgment, his young voice steady and clear. When it was done, when the simple gold bands Sister Mary had found were on their fingers, Daniel and Aiko stepped outside into spring sunshine. Wind from the sea carried petals from nearby trees, swirling them around the small family like nature's own blessing. Daniel lifted Hana in his arms, her laughter bright as the sky above. "We're finally home," he whispered. Aiko slipped her hand into his, Kenji standing tall beside her. Together, they walked down the path toward their waiting life, a life built on courage, sustained by faith, and blessed by mercy that had bridged the divide of war. Behind them, church bells rang out across the valley, their joyful sound carrying to distant hills. Not an ending, but a beginning. Not victory or defeat, but peace, the sweetest peace of all. 10 years passed like the seasons, sometimes slow, sometimes swift, but always changing and growing. The small hut had become a proper house with wooden walls and a tin roof that didn't leak even in the heaviest rains. A wide porch wrapped around 2 sides, offering shade in summer and shelter in the storms that blew in from the sea. The morning sun peeked over distant hills as Daniel Hayes walked the boundaries of his coastal farm. At 40, his hair had begun to gray at the temples, and lines creased the corners of his eyes. Laugh lines, Aiko called them. His body still carried the strength built from years of working the land, though the old shrapnel wound ached when rain was coming. The rice paddies stretched green and vibrant before him, the young plants swaying gently in the morning breeze. This year's crop looked promising. Daniel smiled, remembering his first attempts at planting rice. How the villagers had laughed kindly at the American who couldn't tell seedlings from weeds. Now, his hands knew the feel of good soil, the rhythm of planting and harvest, the patience needed to coax life from the earth. It wasn't so different from his father's wheat farm in Kansas, though he hadn't seen those golden fields in a decade. "Father!" Kenji's voice called from up the path. At 20, he was tall and straight-backed, his face a perfect blend of Takeo's strength and Aiko's gentleness. "The village headman sent word. They need extra teachers for the new school building." Daniel waved in acknowledgement. Kenji had become a respected teacher in the village, sharing his knowledge of English, mathematics, and history with children whose parents had once been wary of the half-Japanese young man. "You heading there now?" Daniel asked as Kenji reached him. "After breakfast," Kenji replied. "Mother sent me to fetch you. She says you work too hard before eating." Daniel chuckled. "Your mother worries too much." "That's what keeps us all alive," Kenji said with a grin. Together they walked back toward the house, passing the small shrine Aiko had built in memory of Takeo. Fresh flowers lay at its base, Hana's doing, most likely. Though she had no memories of her birth father, 17-year-old Hana honored him with the same quiet reverence that marked all her actions. The house came into view, smoke curling from the cooking fire. On the porch, Hana hung laundry on a line while singing softly to herself. Her voice, clear and sweet, carried on the morning air. "There's my 2 farmers!" she called when she spotted them. "Mama says the rice is ready, and she won't serve it twice." Inside, Aiko moved with practiced ease around the kitchen she had designed herself. At 39, Her beauty had deepened, like good wood polished by time. A few strands of silver threaded through her dark hair, caught in the sunlight streaming through the window. She glanced up as Daniel entered, her eyes, the first thing he had truly seen when waking from fever all those years ago, warming with love. "Always the last to breakfast," she teased in English, far more fluent than when they'd first met. Daniel kissed her cheek. "Worth waiting for," he replied, settling at the table. They ate together as they did every morning, rice, fish, and vegetables from their garden. Daniel had never imagined a life so simple could feel so rich. In Kansas, he'd dreamed of adventure, of seeing the world. The war had given him that, but at a terrible cost. Here, in this house, with this family, he had found something better than adventure. He had found peace. "Letter came yesterday," Aiko said, passing a worn envelope across the table. "From your mother." Daniel recognized his mother's careful handwriting immediately. Though he hadn't been home since the war, they exchanged letters regularly. She had never visited. The journey was too difficult for her aging bones, but she had accepted his choice to stay, to build a life across the ocean with the family that had saved him. "I'll read it after breakfast," he said, tucking the envelope into his shirt pocket. "Any news from town?" Kenji nodded eagerly. "The government is sending supplies for the new hospital. Sister Mary's been named head nurse." "At her age?" Daniel raised his eyebrows. Sister Mary must be pushing 70 by now, though she worked with the energy of a woman half her years. "She says God doesn't count the years, only the good works," Hannah chimed in. "And she's teaching me more about medicines. She thinks I might train as a nurse someday." Daniel nodded approvingly. Hannah had her mother's healing touch and a natural compassion that made even the sickest patients feel better in her care. After breakfast, Daniel settled on the porch with his mother's letter, while Aiko tended the garden and the children left for their daily tasks. The paper crinkled as he unfolded it, releasing the faint scent of lavender his mother always pressed between the pages. "My dearest son, spring has come again to Kansas, though my old bones still feel the winter's chill. Your father's wheat is growing strong under your cousin Thomas's care. Sometimes I stand at the edge of the field and imagine you're still here, tall and strong against the horizon. But then I remember the happiness in your words when you write of Aiko and the children, and I know you are exactly where you should be. I pray each night for the family that saved my son, not just his body, but his spirit too. War takes so much from young men. I'm grateful it led you to love, even across an ocean. The doctor says my heart isn't what it used to be, but don't you worry. I have your letters to strengthen me, and the good Lord to guide me home when my time comes." Your loving mother, Daniel, folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. A heaviness settled in his chest at the mention of his mother's health. Should he go back? Just for a visit? But travel was expensive, and the farm needed him. "Hard news?" Aiko asked softly, appearing beside him with garden soil still on her hands. Daniel shook his head. "Ma's not well. Her heart, she says." Aiko sat beside him, taking his hand in hers. "You should go to her," she said simply. "See your home again." "My home is here," Daniel replied, "with you." "Your heart has room for many homes," Aiko said, her wisdom as natural as breathing. "Just as mine holds Japan in memory while loving this land in life." Daniel squeezed her hand. "I'll think on it." The day passed in the rhythm they had established over years, tending crops, repairing tools, preparing for the next day's work. In the afternoon, Daniel walked to the village to help repair the roof of the community center. Several men greeted him with easy familiarity, including some who had once looked at him with suspicion for marrying a Japanese woman. "Hayes, good timing," called Pedro, the village carpenter. "We need your height for these roof beams." Daniel grinned and rolled up his sleeves. Working alongside neighbors, sharing jokes and stories, he felt the simple joy of belonging. This village had become his community, these people his friends. The war that had brought him here seemed like a distant nightmare, faded by years of peace. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Daniel headed home. The path wound through rice paddies glowing golden in the evening light. He paused to watch a heron stalking through shallow water, its movements deliberate and patient. From this spot, he could see their house on the gentle rise, windows warm with lamplight. Smoke rose from the cooking fire, and he could just make out Aiko moving around the yard, gathering laundry from the line. The sight filled his chest with a fullness no words could capture. At home, the evening meal waited. Hana had returned from the mission clinic with news of a new baby born that afternoon. Kenji discussed plans for expanding the school to include more advanced studies. Daniel listened to it all, marveling at how these children, the boy who had once trembled with fear at the sight of an American soldier, the girl who had nearly died of fever, had grown into such fine young people. After dinner, as twilight deepened into night, they gathered on the porch. Neighbors sometimes joined them for these evening gatherings, but tonight it was just family. Kenji read aloud from a book of poetry Sister Mary had given him, his voice strong and clear in the darkness. Aiko worked on mending while she listened. Daniel carved a small wooden horse for the son of a neighbor, a skill he had learned from his own father and now passed on to others. "Read the one about the river," Hana requested when Kenji paused between poems. Kenji smiled and turned the pages until he found it. "The river knows no haste," he read, "yet all things come to it in time." The words washed over Daniel like the gentle evening breeze. He thought of the river of his life, how it had carried him from Kansas to war, from hatred to love, from loneliness to this circle of peace. Later, as Kenji and Hana retired to their rooms, Daniel and Aiko sat alone on the porch steps. The night was clear. Stars sprinkled across the dark sky like diamonds on velvet. Crickets sang in the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a night bird called to its mate. "I've been thinking about what you said," Daniel said, his voice low. "About visiting Kansas." Aiko nodded, waiting. "Maybe we could all go," he continued. "You and the kids, too. Ma should meet her grandchildren before—" He couldn't finish the thought. Aiko leaned against his shoulder. "Yes," she said simply. "We will find a way." They sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies blink on and off in the darkness. The weight of Daniel's mother's letter still pressed on his heart, but beside Aiko, all burdens seemed lighter. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, suddenly. "Helping me that day? Everything that came after?" Aiko looked up at him, surprise in her eyes. "Never," she said firmly. "Not even in darkest times." "We were poor for so long," Daniel said. "Still are, by some standards. I couldn't give you an easy life." "We were poor," Aiko agreed, "but mercy made us rich." She took his hand, her fingers fitting perfectly between his. "Look at what we built, Daniel. Not just house and farm, family, peace, love that war could not break." Daniel nodded, too moved to speak. She was right, of course. What they had built together was worth more than any fortune. The next morning, a special delivery arrived, a package from Sister Mary. Inside was money for passage to America, enough for the whole family. "I cannot go with you," Sister Mary's note read, "but my brother in San Francisco left me this money." I can think of no better use than to help a family stay connected across oceans. God's love knows no borders, neither should ours. 2 months later, they stood on the deck of a passenger ship bound for America. Kenji and Hana leaned against the railing, watching the Philippines disappear behind them. Will Americans like us? Hana asked, a rare note of uncertainty in her voice. Daniel put his arm around her shoulders. Some will, some won't, he answered truthfully. Just like anywhere, but they'll love you once they know you. And if they don't, Kenji added with a half smile, we still have each other. The journey was long, but filled with wonders. Neither Aiko nor the children had ever traveled on a ship before. They marveled at dolphins playing in the bow wave, at storms that made the vessel creak and groan, at the endless blue of sky meeting sea. For Daniel, each day brought them closer to the home he had left behind. Would it still feel like home? Would his mother recognize the man he had become? Would his neighbors understand the choices he had made? Kansas welcomed them with golden wheat fields waving in summer heat. Daniel's cousin Thomas met them at the train station with an old truck that had once been Daniel's father's. Ain't you a sight? Thomas said, pumping Daniel's hand. Uncle Henry would have been proud to see you come home, even for a visit. The farmhouse where Daniel had grown up looked smaller than he remembered, its white paint peeling in places. On the porch, in a rocking chair, sat his mother, smaller too, more fragile, but her eyes lit up like Christmas morning when she saw him. Danny, she breathed as he climbed the porch steps. My boy. Ma, Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion as he knelt beside her chair. I brought my family to meet you. Eleanor Hayes looked past her son to where Aiko stood with Kenji and Hana. For a long moment, she was silent, studying these strangers from across the world. Then she opened her arms. Come here, children, she said, her voice suddenly strong. Let me look at my grandchildren. Hana went to her first, then Kenji. Eleanor touched, their faces gently, as if memorizing them by feel. You have your father's eyes, she told Kenji, strong and kind. You knew my father? Kenji asked, surprised. Eleanor smiled. I know his son, she said simply. That tells me all I need to know about the man. Finally, she turned to Aiko, who had waited patiently. And you, Eleanor said, you saved my son when he was lost. There aren't words enough to thank you for that gift. Aiko bowed deeply. Your son saved us too, she replied. We give each other life. That evening, neighbors came to welcome Daniel home and meet his family. Some were awkward at first, unsure how to relate to this Japanese woman and her half-American children. But as the night wore on, as stories were shared, and laughter filled the old farmhouse, the strangeness melted away. Eleanor watched it all from her rocking chair, joy and a touch of sadness in her eyes. They fit here, she told Daniel quietly. Your family belongs anywhere you are. We're not staying, Ma, Daniel said gently. Our home is in the Philippines now. Eleanor nodded. I know, but you came, and that's enough. I've seen my grandchildren. I've met the woman who healed my son's heart. I can go in peace when my time comes. They stayed through the summer harvest, Kenji and Daniel helping Thomas bring in the wheat, while Hana and Aiko learned Eleanor's recipes: cornbread, apple pie, fried chicken. Two worlds blended in that Kansas kitchen, with Aiko teaching Eleanor to make sushi in return. When September came, with its cooler nights and golden afternoons, they prepared to return to their farm across the ocean. The goodbye was harder than Daniel had expected. His mother seemed to have grown smaller during their visit, as if their presence had been the only thing keeping her strong. You write to me, Eleanor insisted, holding Daniel's face between her weathered hands. Every month, You hear? I want to know everything." "Yes, Ma," Daniel promised, his throat tight. As they boarded the train that would take them to the coast, Daniel looked back at his mother standing on the platform. Thomas supported her with a gentle hand, but she stood straight, waving until they were out of sight. "She is very strong," Aiko said softly beside him. "Like her son." Daniel nodded, unable to speak. They returned to their Philippine farm as autumn painted the hills in rich colors. The house had been well tended in their absence by neighbors who had once been strangers, but were now friends. Life resumed its familiar pattern: planting, harvesting, teaching, healing. Letters from Kansas came regularly at first, filled with news of neighbors and church socials, recipes Eleanor wanted to share, questions about their life across the ocean. Then, as winter approached, a telegram arrived instead of a letter. Eleanor Hayes had passed peacefully in her sleep. She was buried beside Daniel's father in the small church cemetery, where generations of Hayes farmers rested. Daniel grieved, quietly, finding comfort in the routines of the farm and the love of his family. Aiko planted a cherry tree in Eleanor's memory, a bridge between worlds, she called it. "Your mother watches over us," Aiko said one evening as they sat beneath the young tree. "Just as my ancestors watch. Just as Takeo watches over his children." "I believe that," Daniel said, and found that he truly did. More years passed. Kenji eventually married a local teacher, building a house on their land. Hana trained as a nurse under Sister Mary's guidance, her gentle hands bringing comfort to many. On the 25th anniversary of the day Aiko had found Daniel wounded in the reeds, they held a celebration. Friends from the village came, along with Sister Mary, now stooped with age but still sharp as ever. Even Corporal Mason, long since retired, made an appearance. Time and reflection had softened his hatred, though he would never be a close friend. "Never thought I'd see the day," Mason said gruffly, shaking Daniel's hand. "An American and a Japanese making a life together. World's changed." "People change," Daniel corrected gently. "The world just follows along." As evening fell, lanterns were lit around the yard. Children, including Kenji's young son and daughter, chased fireflies while adults talked and laughed. Daniel watched it all from the porch steps, a contentment so deep it felt like peace itself filling his chest. Aiko joined him, her hand finding his as it had countless times over the years. "Happy?" she asked, though she knew the answer. Daniel nodded. "More than I ever thought possible." They sat together as darkness deepened and stars appeared overhead. The same stars that shone on Kansas, on Japan, on all the places that had shaped their journey. Daniel thought of the scared, wounded soldier he had been, and the bitter Corporal Mason had been. He thought of Sister Mary's faith and his mother's love. He thought of Takeo's sacrifice and Aiko's courage. All of it, the pain and joy, the fear and hope, had led to this moment, this life, this love that had grown in the most unlikely soil. "You know," he said quietly, "when I was lying in that irrigation ditch, half dead and praying, I asked God for mercy. And he sent me to find you," Aiko finished with a small smile. "Best answer to a prayer a man ever got," Daniel agreed. From inside the house came the sound of laughter as Kenji told a story to the gathered children. Life would go on, through his children and grandchildren, through the students they taught, through the neighbors they helped. Daniel and Aiko would grow old together on this land, watching seasons change and crops grow, witnessing the world heal slowly from the wounds of war. Their story, the American soldier saved by a poor Japanese widow and her children, would be told and retold, proof that grace could outlive hatred, that mercy could build bridges where walls once stood. As night wrapped around them like a blanket, Daniel thanked God for unanswered prayers, for the dreams of home and glory that had died in the mud of Luzon, making way for something far more precious to grow in their place. Not victory or defeat, but something rarer and more beautiful: peace.